Chris POV. Chris stirred from a short rest, finding himself alone after an intense testing of one of the new beds with Sarah. Sitting up, he spotted a bucket of clear-looking water, accompanied by a clean brown rag and a small bottle of scented oil, which he quickly used to wipe himself down and freshen up, before getting dressed and making his way upstairs. The shop was dark and quiet, and after heading further up to the living room, he spotted Zax sitting against a counter in the kitchenette as he quietly ate vicar berries off the vine, using his teeth instead of plucking them before eating. "Hey, when did you get back?" he asked after swallowing, flashing a pleasant smile before holding the bunch of berries up above his head and lowering them just enough so he could bite off a few. "A while ago, actually. Though it's not like you would have noticed since you were asleep," Chris said as he walked over, plucking a few berries off of Zax's berry bunch before popping one in his mouth, as he looked Zax up and down and chewed quietly. "Speaking of which, are you okay? You've been sleeping a lot more than usual these days." Zax just hummed softly, not really answering as the two snacked on the fruit. Though after a few minutes he eventually mustered up a response. "I think I'm just relaxed," he said, simmering on those words for a few more minutes and several more berries. "Ever since the boss paid off my family's debts, it's like this knot of stress and tension just released, you know? It's been easier for me just to close my eyes and keep them closed. No more tossing and turning, no stressing about my next payment, no worries that I'll be carried away to God's nowhere. Just peace." "I know what you mean. I honestly thought we'd be dead the day we met the boss, but now I can't imagine a proper future without him," Chris said, flashing a small smile as he glanced around the room, noting how Lugosi still slept in the same corner from earlier. I mean, what he's done for Ren alone is just nothing short of life-changing. It was then that Chris felt a hand on his shoulder, glancing over at Zax, who had since set down the fruit before staring into Chris's eyes. "And what exactly has the boss done for Ren? And what has he done to you?" "Now there's a red side. It's not often that you ask for details like this," Chris mused, opting to deflect for at least a few more seconds, as his ears flicked at Zax's unusually inquisitive mood. Zax merely grunted, pulling away as he leaned back against the counter and tilted his head from side to side. "Yeah, but even I noticed the eye thing," he said, tapping at his lower eyelid. "And it's involving your kid's sister. Sure, we usually keep business and family separate, but Sarah and I don't have much by way of family, so it's not like we've got much else to really care about," he reasoned, sounding fairly sheepish as he scratched the side of his neck while looking away. Chris couldn't help but feel a small smile form on his lips as he looked away as well. "Well, I appreciate the concern, but, yeah, there's been something," he admitted, while letting out a sigh. "The boss is something. More than a simple human, I think," he said, glancing over at the still dozing wolf before regarding Zax again. "Well, duh, that's obvious enough, isn't it?" Zax chuckled out, as if Chris had just discovered that the sun was bright or that water was wet. Chris smirked a bit as his tail curled and tapped against the kitchen cabinets. "Yeah, aside from the obvious, of course, but I think he might be something disguised as a human. Maybe a fae, fiend, or perhaps some kind of celestial." Zax just let out a low whistle as he nodded along, but didn't have much to say as he waited for Chris to say his piece. "He offered me this contract. Or rather, he offered it to Ren, but I accepted it first," he explained with a shrug and a wave of his hand. "He called it a familial bond. It linked us to him in some way. He shared his mana with us, and we both awakened our mana hearts. Now I can speak to Ren with my mind, as well as with the wolf and everyone else around the boss, save for Riley and Lostrel." "Never heard of anything like that before. Then again, I generally don't hear about much of anything," Zax admitted with a shrug, before furrowing his brow in thought. "So does this mean the boss is like your dad now, or something?" "Does it?" Chris has to ask, the thought having not actually crossed his mind until just now. "I mean, I guess I'm not opposed to it," he considered while crossing his arms. "At least the boss has done more for Ren these last couple of weeks than anything the bastard who abandoned us ever did." Zax merely shrugged at the conclusion Chris had reached, before picking up the bunch of vicar berries again. "Well, that might be a talk you're going to need to have with the boss eventually, I think." Chris merely nodded as the two stood there in shared silence, Zax occasionally holding out the berry bunch for Chris to pluck a few, when he was up for it. Though as the minutes trickled away, Chris's ears suddenly perked as he glanced over at Zax. "Where's Sarah?" Zax could only chuckle softly as he chewed and swallowed. "She's out scouting our new fishing grounds, mapping out escape routes and the like, now that we have a home to operate out of. At least that's what she told me." Chris just sighed with a smile on his lips as he brushed some of his curly orange hair out of his face. It's incredible how driven she is for the pursuit of coin. The minutes go by as usual when Festa peeks out of a doorway, her thoughts prodding at Chris's mind and making him jump at the unfamiliar sensation. Yeah, okay. We're coming," Chris said aloud, as he scratched the back of his head while looking over at Zax. "Let's go. Looks like the little initiate is starting to stir." As he moved a step away from the kitchenette, he recalled how Vito had said the rabbitkin would be hungry and thirsty when they woke up. Taking only a moment to source a cup and a pitcher of water, he then pocketed a palm-sized fruit with edible flesh before going over to the bedroom, Festa standing by the door while Wither sat in a chair beside the bed. The rabbitkin writhed under the sheets, sounding distressed as they curled into themselves, before sitting up with a start, a wild look in their eyes as they tried to scoot away from everyone, until their backs pressed against the headboard, their lop-eared head flicking and twitching with every glance. "Whoa, calm down. You're in a safe house and everything is okay," Chris said, trying to be as reassuring as possible while setting the water down on the nightstand, before holding out the fruit for the rabbitkin to see and setting it on the bed. The rabbitkin's stomach audibly grumbled at the sight of the food. However, his eyes narrowed as they began rapidly darting around the room with renewed vigour and suspicion, taking in their surroundings and everyone's faces, before spotting Wither and jolting with surprise. I don't know any of you, and this ain't any safe house I've seen before," the rabbitkin all but squeaked out. "How do I know you're not one of those sickos that's been taking kids and stuff?" "Kids are being taken?" Wither asked, and despite how level his voice was, Chris could feel just how disturbed Wither was by the notion of children being placed in harm's way. "Does the boss know about this?" Chris winced at the surge of emotion coming from Wither, as well as Festa, who was still in the doorway, before collecting himself just enough to glance around the room. "Yeah, and he does. Beggars and prostitutes in particular have been going missing according to recent internal reports, though we don't know if that's everyone yet, since we're far from an accurate head count." The rabbitkin stared at Chris with visible confusion, though at some point they had snatched up the fruit and all but stripped it down to the hard seed within, and popped that into their mouth and cheeked it for some reason. "Say, why does it sound like you know what you're talking about? Who are you all anyhow?" they asked, while helping themselves to the pitcher of water, drinking straight from it, and then setting it back in his lap. "You can think of us as investigators from a frontier thieves guild that has no ties or relation to the capital," Chris stated, with his arms crossed and his chest slightly puffed out, liking how he had phrased that. The little rabbitkin watched Chris skeptically, before glancing over at Wither and quickly looking away as their ears drooped lower than they had moments before. "So, what happened to those bastards who jumped me? I was sure I was chomping the ice before waking up again." "I killed them," Wither stated simply enough. "I killed 2 of them. The boss got the 3rd, he clarified matter-of-factly. At the mention of a boss, the rabbitkin looked over at Chris, and he simply shook his head. "The boss is out and about on personal business right now, and I'm handling guild affairs in his absence." "I see. Well, what do you want with me?" the rabbitkin asked, bringing the pitcher back up to their lips as he tilted his head back to properly drink from the pitcher, loudly gulping down more water before letting out a loud, satisfied sigh. "We wanted the assistance of a local so that we can start getting our feet indoors and learn who the local assets and players are while we get settled in," Chris readily explained, then shrugged as he looked the rabbitkin over. "We weren't planning on recruiting an initiate like you, but it seems we got mixed up together anyway." The rabbitkin smacked his lips, glancing over at Wither before turning to look up at Chris, as he hummed for a moment. Sure, I can swing that sort of thing, not a problem." Chris couldn't help but look a little surprised, as his ears perked and brows raised for a moment. "Really? Just like that?" The rabbitkin bobbed his head casually as he moved to get out of bed, wincing and grunting a little bit, but committing to the decision anyway.
Yeah, I'd be guttermulch without you. If I can pay you back by working as a Guild City guide, then I'm more than willing to work off my debts, he reasoned, while massaging seemingly sore parts of his chest and arms. But before we get down to any of the nitty-gritty, I should probably make my way home, so my people don't worry too much about me.
Your people? Chris asked, watching the little rabbitkin stretch and loosen up before curiously looking over the freshly washed and mended clothes they were wearing, with confused wiggles of their lopped ears.
Yeah, I run with a small group. We look out for each other. The oldest among us has our toes in with various guilds, and one of us is even a dungeon delver. She makes the most out of all of us when she can afford to pay to delve into them floors that require admission or what have you, he said, looking vaguely proud before squinting and glancing at the others, as he rolled the seed around in his mouth for a moment. Not that it's any of your business or anything.
Chris nodded as he looked at Zax, flicking his ears, as Zax nodded and stepped out of the room, walking past Fester, who was still by the door. All right, we'll tag along then. Not that we don't trust you or anything. Well, we don't, but that doesn't matter. Kids are getting snatched up, and you nearly got killed tonight, so an escort might not be a bad idea.
A whole escort for little old me? Boy, do I feel special,
the rabbitkin mused, shrugging as he started walking out of the room, while glancing over at Wither and hesitating a small step.
Ah, crap. I'm not going to have anything to take back to the others. I lost my entire haul when those guys got me, he said, sounding rather annoyed as he scratched behind one of his ears.
That's when Fester held out a pouch she had been holding on to, the clinking of coins causing Chris and the rabbitkin's ears to twitch at the sound. The rabbitkin appeared to look unnerved as he glanced around, Chris approaching as he came up beside him. The boss decided to compensate you for the goods you snagged. He said it was the least he could do after the materials you helped send his way, he explained, getting the gist from Fester.
Materials?
The rabbitkin asked uneasily, as he glanced at Fester before hesitantly taking the coin pouch and peering inside. His ears bounced with surprise as he looked over at Chris.
There's gold in here,
he excitedly whispered, as if not wanting to call attention to some sort of mistake, but unable to really contain himself. And there's more where that came from, as long as you keep yourself useful to us, Chris said, flashing an easy smile, while not exactly sure if he was telling the truth or not, but doing his best to be convincing regardless. The rabbitkin looked thoughtful as he bounced the coin pouch in his palm, before sliding it into his pocket for the moment, and holding his hand out to Chris.
My name is Jody, to be honest. I was only going to help you for a few days before ditching you all, but if this is how you're going to be treating me from the jump, then I suppose I'll take this as the start of some proper guild business.
It's good to be doing business with you, Jody. I'm Chris, that's Zax, Fester, and Wither, Chris said, grabbing Jody by the forearm as the two gave a firm shake, and then pointed everyone out. Jody pulled away, his fingers absently tracing the pouch in his pocket before looking around at everyone.
It's nice to meet all of you. Now then, can we get going?
He asked, the barest hint of impatience finally peeking through his voice as he looked to the door, leading out of the living room, and back down to the shop. Go on ahead, Zax should be waiting for you, and I'll be down soon, Chris instructed, sending him off out of sight as he looked to Fester and Wither, who had gotten up from the seat to stand at the door as well. Should we come with you? Wither prompted, as Fester looked on with a similar question on her mind. Nah, I prefer to have you stay here. It'll be easier for us to remain unnoticed if you two weren't around, Chris said, looking admittedly apologetic as he made a vague gesture to their wooden masks. Wither and Fester shared a look when their shoulders both sagged ever so slightly as Wither spoke up. That is a fair point. At that, Chris patted their shoulders before pulling away, as the duo went to occupy themselves with one thing or another. As for Chris, he looked around before finding the room Ren was using, peeking in to see her asleep in bed, with Freely cuddled into the crook of Ren's neck. The cub peeked out at Chris, her green iris seemingly glinting in the hall light, before closing it as she settled back into sleep. Shutting the door and making his way downstairs, he found Zax idly leaning against the store counter, Chris's Wolfram mace resting in his arms, as he watched Jody quietly poke through his coin pouch, no doubt counting what the boss gave him. Let's get going, Chris said, collecting his mace as Zax held it out to him, hooking it to a loop on his belt as Zax held the door, and the trio made their way out onto the relatively quiet streets. Jody quietly whistled as he took in his surroundings.
In a city safe house, eh? Fronting as a store, too. Quite the sweet little nook. Did you get set up with a tunnel access? Probably not if we're not already taking it to get outside the walls.
Nope, the boss got the place set up without making use of any guild resources. The only thing the local guild did was mark it so nobody would be foolish enough to hit the place. Chris helpfully explained, as he looked around as well. Where do you live?
Not within the walls, that's for sure, Jody said with a slight chuckle, scratching his chin in thought, as he looked from one end of the road to the other. Look, we can leave the inner city, no problem, but getting back in this late will cost you, especially if you don't have any documents. Considering how new you are around here, that's probably the case. With that, he looked to his right and started walking, pointing ahead. Let's take a tunnel. I'll show you the route that takes you outside the walls so you can find your way back after. Consider this me starting to pay your back, Jody mused with a smile.
Noted, Chris said, as he shared a smile with Zax as the trio started their walk. Within a few minutes, Chris felt a hand sliding into his own, their fingers intertwining with one another, as he glanced at Sarah, who flashed him a silent but playful smile as the group continued down the street. As they walked, the crystal lights around them started to take on a pinkish-red hue, the air of music and play of all sorts tickling Chris's senses, as the nightly festivities were in full swing. The calls of men and women beckoned all those who passed to partake in the myriad of delights they contained within their venues. Ignoring it all, Jody cut into an alleyway, leading the group down a path that was only intermittently illuminated by various crystal lamps, before approaching an inconspicuous nook. After another few moments looking it over, he took a few steps back, and then took a few more when he looked at Chris, only to jump a little when he spotted Sarah.
Whoa! Who's that?
Chris chuckled a bit at Jody's reaction as he pulled Sarah close to him, Sarah happily obliging as she leaned her head against his shoulder. This is Sarah, the especially light touch that reliably lines our pockets.
Good to see you walking around after suffering all those career enders, she said, as she pulled away from Chris to walk a circle around Jody. The boss never ceases to amaze with that magic of his. How do you feel?
Jody's ears flicked uneasily as Sarah measured him up with her eyes.
Just a little sore is all.
So what are we doing here? Chris asked, approaching the nook as his eyes wandered to the brickwork. Though even as he asked, he could already guess that this was likely a hidden door of some sort.
It's a sigil lock. You gotta trace your fingers across the brick and draw 3 shapes. First, a 4-sided diamond, within the diamond a circle, and within the circle a triangle, Jody explained, averting his gaze as Sarah leaned in close, staring Jody down for no real reason as far as Chris could tell. While Chris wondered why Jody hadn't simply done it himself, he decided not to argue, as he looked over the wall before running his fingers along the bricks in the pattern he had been told to use. Once he pulled away, the brick began to part, silently, folding in on itself using some form of magic, and the cool blue light of crystal lamps illuminated a path downward. Guess that means you've got a guild key,
Jody said, quickly stepping away from Sarah as he hurried down the steps to lead the way, followed by Zax and Sarah. Before Chris could ask for clarification, he suddenly felt a chill run down his spine as he turned to look back up the alleyway. His gaze trailed over to the wall. Not that he was looking at anything in particular, but it felt like he was looking beyond it. What was that? He felt himself mumble, shuddering from the strange and sudden spike in emotion that all but dunked his head in ice water before ripping him back out. You coming, Chris? Sarah called up, stepping back into view to look Chris over with a quirked brow. It took a few seconds, but Chris managed to blink away the fugue before making his way down. Yeah, I'm right behind you, he said, flashing an unconvincing smile as he fell into step with the group.